thank you, Lily, for putting me up in the main box here. But what I'd like to do, because I'm hosting the show tonight, is just to introduce Beaver Politics. We're a place where we talk about Canadian politics, where we platform a guest speaker so they can have an uninterrupted opportunity to speak their facts, their opinions, and, give and share their knowledge and wisdom. It's about Canadian politics, although we all know the Americans kind of affect us, and global politics is a thing as well. But we want to focus mostly on what's happening here in Canada to educate our kind, so to speak. And the uninterrupted platform is a big piece of that, because that space isn't really happening anywhere else. So we welcome you, Simcoe Gray, to the show. I'm going to introduce Mrs. Radical. She's got a little piece to say. I'm going to introduce Nerdy, because the three of us make this whole thing jive. And when we're done our little pieces, then, Simcoe Gray, we're going to turn it over to you. And we can have that back and forth conversation, or you can just let her rip. It's all yours. So let's start with Mrs. Radical.
We are three Canadian women that have come together from different age groups. Welcome to Beaver Politics. We've come together to create a forum for us to conversate about Canadian politics and social justice. And this is so important for us to, I don't want to go to the left and talk about it, but just for Canadian voices to have these respectful civil conversations where we can learn new thoughts and ideas and create community. Mm-hmm. Because we're not all used to that. And that's a really important part of growing here in Canada. So
thank you.
At that. Take it away, Simcoe.
No, Nerdy's going to say her little tech.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
All right. So, as usual, tapping is clapping. If you can tap on the screen, then that would be fantastic. That helps get the live pushed out. We definitely need to get to 20K likes, like in the next 15 minutes. So tapping is clapping. It's free to do. Easy thing to do. If you can share out as well, the best way to do a share is if you tap on the Beaver Politics picture here and you hold down on it, it'll bring up a screen for you. And then you can hit send to a bunch of friends instead of just hitting that share button and sending it out to 10 friends at once, because that only counts as one share. What else? We have our team up at the top. So that little heart right next to there, that's one coin. It also helps boost the live out to get more people in here. And then also we do have subscriptions. So subscriptions are $5.49. $5.49, and then they're 15% off right now, I think. So with the subscriptions, you get a bunch of stickers that are down in the bottom, and then you also get access to our Beaver Dam Discord, where we're going to be sharing a whole bunch of information about new stuff that's coming out with Canadian politics, especially in light of this week's election. And last but not least, we do have a YouTube channel. So every Friday I go and I post, usually in the morning. It'll schedule to post first thing in the morning. We'll post the live from the day before. So if you do ever have to miss a live, then you can see it afterwards. So if we can continue on tapping, that'd be fantastic.
You're awesome. And we did that in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That's awesome. So Simcoe Gray, just for formatting purposes, we let people up into the box because it helps to get the live generated, helps to get the, algorithm going. So, but we keep everybody on mute except for me, the host. And in case you want to ask questions or, the conversation just leads in different places. So having said that, I'm going to do the basic introduction for Simcoe Gray Greens. He is somebody from Ontario, and I'm very impressed with his background. I'm very impressed with your page in general, because you bring the facts and you bring the receipts and you have a very calm way of explaining chaos. So I hope that the audience can, enjoy all that in your conversation tonight. And, the fact that you've walked the walk in running in an actual election, I find that very interesting. And so without further ado, I'm going to let you take the floor and let's have a conversation.
Right on. I first of all would like to say I'm just humbled and grateful to be here in the company of such smart, dynamic, powerful women, and I love the platform you've created here. And yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. So hello from Ontario. My page is Simcoe Grey Greens because that's the riding that I represented in the last federal election, and I really respect that you've created this platform for conversation because that's what democracy is to me. I think you don't run for the Green Party, especially in the last election, federally, to win. And I think elections have all become, especially with our electoral system, basically like horse races. They're just, it's about who can win. And this is how we get into this partisan, polarized, red and blue, two-party kind of system where it's just like one versus the other. And it really doesn't serve all of us in a democracy when the conversation becomes that limited and that narrow. And I've been blissfully unaware of the U.S. election. I have to say, I know people really want to talk about it, and it's really the thing. But I managed to like really just not pay any attention to it. I've become kind of numb to it, to be honest. And other than what it means for Canadians, I try to pay as little attention as possible. Obviously, it's bad news. It's to me kind of set the stage for okay, this is what we're going to deal with for the next 4 years. But truly, this is the worst outcome. I don't think it could have been worse than this, but it is what it is. And now, the sometimes what people call, the purely ceremonial act of voting is done. Now we get to work. Now we have these conversations. Now we show up for each other. We speak up when it's necessary, and we don't just be complacent. I love TikTok for all you people who are political junkies and want to talk about these things, because this is where real democracy happens, and this is why I ran in an election. I'm just a school teacher. I was asked, the opportunity was there. I was like, I'll use this platform, and I did it specifically because I wanted to have a platform and a bigger voice in democracy. And I thought that, I live in a conservative, safe riding. It's been blue forever since it was created, and
Mhm.
it's really taken for granted. When you live in a safe riding like I do, my representative, he sits in the back of the legislature in the back row, and he talks once in a while, but most of the time he's just there to vote as his party tells him to vote. And I spoke to actually the conservative representative from the riding next to me, and he said to me, city councilors do more for democracy than I do, or your representative. We go to, and we just vote. We don't really, do anything. We might sit on some committees, but other than that, we just show up and we vote the way that we're told. And that's coming, I won't say who it was, but that's coming straight from an elected conservative representative in the House of Commons who sits in the House. So they, when you have this idea that politics is just about winning, and you have the conservative safe riding, or whatever safe type of riding, although it does seem like everything's up for grabs these days, they really don't care. And I don't think it's true representative democracy, because your representative can't respond to your needs. My representative certainly doesn't respond to me. Um,
Mhm.
I wanted to debate him, and that's why I ran in the election. And he didn't show up for the debate, because when you're in a safe riding, they're told, they're instructed to not do anything. Don't engage, because you'll just mess up a good thing potentially. You're going to win anyway, so why bother participating in this very necessary part of democracy? So that was very, disappointing to me. And and yeah, I mean that's why I'm still doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm on TikTok. That's why I'm making noises I am, because it's something that I think is necessary, and that I'm think it's wonderful that all of us are doing, and it's just important.
It's a valid
So
point, and I think
yeah,
that we experienced out in British Columbia the same phenomenon. John Roostad, who is the actual leader of the BC Conservative Party, just didn't show up to his debates. Just didn't
yeah,
show up, and it was no foul, and made no difference in terms of election results. And I see a pattern. I see a pattern about what you're talking about here. So it's good that we address it and we start looking at it and demanding our politicians to show up. It's a
so
job.
you now have you didn't have this a year ago. You now have a conservative party in BC.
Yeah.
So you're going to see this conservative playbook playing out in your ridings across the province, where the conservative representative will be told, people are going to vote based on whatever red meat we've been tossing out to the base. They don't really need you to show up to a debate to be held accountable in any way, because it's just potentially just going to mess up a good thing for them. I do believe that first past the post is part of the problem. When people know that it's just about winning and they have the edge that they need to win, they don't need to show up and be part of a democracy. Don't be part of the conversation. Democracy is a conversation. So, what I see as a major problem in this is that let's just take Polyev for example. Okay, we're going federally here. Um, he has his four slogans, right? They're four slogans. They're verb, the noun, all of them, right? We all know them. And I think some of them were used in the BC election too. They were axing the tax. So these are things that don't have much substance to them. You have a leader who's out there basically peddling misinformation and lying. So axe the tax is anti-tax, which conservatives, that's the conservative base is anti-tax and anti-government. So you want to blame everything on the tax, and a great portion of my page is just debunking this myth that the carbon tax is the source of all of our ills. It's not even that great a policy to be honest, but it's also not that bad. It's not as bad as they want it to be. So, looking at what's another one? It's another one of the slogans: "Stop the crime." One thing the governments are supposed to do is fund the police and the military and keep law and order. That's the one thing they're supposed to do. So support the troops and pay the police and build the homes. That's a really strange. This is one that I don't think they can get around. So they have to say that. Of course, he can say that, but he doesn't really have any policies to back it up. And then the last one is, I guess, bring home powerful paychecks or something like that, which is not verb the noun. So if we look at those, when we talk about libertarianism, I'm going to go back to the Freedom Convoy. Now, not many people know this, but the Freedom Convoy, there were two convoys before the big one but they were just kind of like nothing. They were different kinds of events. They were like very friendly or whatever, but they were based in the Yellow Vest movement and United We Roll, which is some kind of like Alberta first pro oil and gas, really heavily capitalist kind of movement, and they did their things. But it wasn't until the convoy happened during the pandemic that it really just took on a life of its own. And it was really hard to nail down what the convoy was because it was such a decentralized movement. They had its core, but it started taking in other people around it. And I want to share a little story, if I can, about a personal story about how I experienced this and how I came to know this. So I was involved with some protesting against the Royal Bank of Canada because they are one of the top financiers of fossil fuels in Canada and in the world. They're the highest financier in Canada and in the top 5 globally for funding fossil fuel projects. And one of the projects they're funding is the Coastal GasLink pipeline. Would not be possible without them. That's going through ancestral lands, Wet'suwet'en territory in BC. So a friend of mine decided to, this was as the convoy was happening after the election, he closed down the Royal Bank by chaining himself to the door. And there was just a little bit of a protest around there, and we managed to shut down the bank for the day. And people, because we live on the southern tip of Georgian Bay, were making their way across the country to Ottawa, and they were going around the bay, the bottom of the bay. So some people actually, on their way to the convoy, stopped and saw what we were doing. So this guy pulls up, a couple pull up in a big black pickup truck that I saw was 2 stories tall, and they pull up in front of the bank, and they're like, "Yeah, we gotta tell this, this government, what's what." And they had no idea what we were doing there, but they thought because of what we were doing, we were part of the Freedom Convoy somehow. So we just, said, "Okay, thanks for your support," and the conversation ended there. They drove off. And another person stopped by to talk to us. It was a really lovely woman who was taking her daughter across the country, and she was going there because she basically was lonely during the pandemic, and she was just really excited about this opportunity to connect with other Canadians. It wasn't about whatever the convoy was about for, Tamara Leach or Pat King or any of those central organizers, it wasn't about that for her. So it was really hard to pin down what this convoy was because it was different things to so many different people. There were racists in there. There were white supremacists in there. There were pro oil and gas people in there. There were fierce libertarians in there, which you would expect based on an anti-government movement. But it really was about more than that. And I think lefts and progressives like me, we wish that we could have some type of galvanizing movement like the far right did with the convoy and the hundreds of millions or 100 million. I don't know how many. Do you remember how much money they raised? Like a lot of that money was coming from the States. You want to talk about foreign interference, but it was like they raised like $10 million in a few days, and at least, yeah. And then of course they started seizing bank accounts and whatnot, and so I'm obviously shutting down the Royal Bank, very pro-protest. It's our right, democratic right. So what was different about the convoy for me was that these were people who were protesting for the first time, and it wasn't your typical protest. You didn't know what these people were about. The only thing that's sort of one centralizing component of it was a memorandum that was released by one of the central organizing groups that called for the Governor General to dissolve the government and install a government without an election, which was insane. And they quickly removed that from their website after they realized how it was, first of all, not a thing. You can't do that. And it's also a little bit fascist, right? Which is also a very big component of the convoy, was a bit of fascism, sorry to say. So this idea of privilege, which I wanted to talk about, the convoy seemed to me like a mass display of people who they had legitimate grievances, okay? It was not easy, the pandemic, and people were hurting economically. And when people are hurting economically, they start to look for people to blame, and the government just became it. And to this day, people are still blaming the government, and they still blame the carbon tax because they've just sort of fixated on that. And it's not the actual problem. It's a distraction. And if you look at what, the Freedom Convoy, one of the things they were protesting were travel bans, closing of the border. Mm-hmm. Well, you know who the travel ban never affected? People with private jets, the ultra wealthy. The pandemic did not exist for some people. Now, for the people who really it existed for, and it really hurt, and who really paid the price for it, they showed up to Ottawa and they occupied it because it was the first time basically they'd been inconvenienced in any way in their entire lives. And they didn't like it. But instead of fixating on, the real problem behind their economic woes and also just the anti-vax stuff, which is a whole other, element of misinformation and misunderstanding, they wanted to blame the government. And really, it's just people don't understand government like the way that we do here, political junkies on TikTok. So that began this, we'll believe anything that sort of makes us feel better about this. And that includes blaming the government, thinking that vaccines are microchipping us, and that brings me right back around to why I'm on TikTok, and that's to fight misinformation, because I don't think we can have real solutions unless we are looking at the real problems. And it's so heartbreaking to me to have a demagogue like Polyev come out here and lie to people and platform misinformation and give people false solutions and fake populism so he can get their vote. And it's all about him. It's all about his party and his personal gain, and his quest for power, and nothing else. I don't think he really, in fact, I know he doesn't care about Canadians, because if he did, he wouldn't be the partisan attack dog that he is. He would vote for workers' rights. He would vote for, if you really want people, the only things that really help people make more money and wages are labor shortages and unions, or withdrawal of work. That's when when it's a labor market, then people start paying more because they have to. They don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. But if we think that Pierre Poilievre is going to come in here and give us the big paychecks that we're going to, I see no evidence to support that. We can talk about capital gains. I'm just wrapping up here. We can talk about capital gains. We can talk about misinformation about the carbon tax. We can talk about any of the social, culture wars that they have us fighting, so that they can slip in with, like, I'll just finish by saying, Polyev is a hypocrite because he's telling everybody what they want to hear, and he's saying lobbyists are useless and overpaid, and meanwhile, and he's saying, for workers, and he's gonna help Canadians, and he's gonna build homes, on the Canadian Shield, because Canada is a huge place, so we can build homes wherever we want, where people don't want to live. But really, when it comes down to it, he is fundraising at some of the richest mansions and postal codes around Canada, and he's been flying on your dime and my dime the entire time because there's no campaign period, right? So he's traveling all over the country as the leader of the Conservative Party. He's attending these $1,700 a plate fundraisers, and he's doing it, I guess, questionably on your dime and my dime, while he also lives in Stornoway, which he doesn't have to. Stornoway is for people who are, leader of the opposition who lives outside of Ottawa, and he's the representative for Carleton. So he doesn't need the $20,000 a month Stornoway home, but he is taking advantage of it. So all this talk about, government spending and all that, he is the epitome of that. And I don't know, and the fact that we don't see through this, or people cannot see through this, is just another bit of evidence that tells me, and should tell all of us, that people have been duped, and we have bought the lies so much that we don't even want to admit to ourselves that we're wrong. We don't want to admit to ourselves that, hey, anytime we see this evidence that is like, hey, this is not right, or we double down and we say, as an environmentalist, people say, oh, well, your electric cars are, not that the electric cars are the answer. What about cobalt mining in the Congo? And well, yeah, that's a problem. I'm not saying, well, I'm talking about the environment. You're talking about exploitation. But the fact that you want to say that, trying to change things for the better while living in this world is somehow wrong, it doesn't say anything about me being wrong. It says more about you projecting your own insecurity, and that that you cannot admit to yourself that you've bought into the system. And if you tell yourself it's your choice, and you tell yourself it's the right thing to do, well, then you can comfortably keep living this lie that we've lived for so long. And that makes it really hard in a democracy to have the conversations that we need to have about how to make things better. Criticism of capitalism, criticism of like real solutions, not just scapegoating immigrants and a carbon tax that is responsible for this much inflation. So that's me. I will wrap it up there, and I welcome that conversation. I'd love to hear the other voices here, because you're all such dynamic and knowledgeable speakers. So let's go.
All right.
Thank you for listening to that.
Yeah, well, that was a lot, right? Like, there's a lot that you said there, a lot to unpack, so to speak. One of the
Can Nerdy interject quick?
Oh yes, let's give Nerd. Oh, we like to do the tap tap thing. Yes, let's.
Just a reminder, tapping is clapping. So if we can do some tapping and get the live pushed out a little bit more, we're doing great. We have lots of people in here, which is awesome. So 39 people in here. If we all fill the bar a couple times, we should easily be able to get to like 25K. And share it out to a few friends. We can get the shares up to probably about 350. Like I said before, join our team, that little heart button up there. If you like what you're seeing today, send us a subscription. It's $5.49 and you get like a discount. There's a 15% discount, I think, right now. You get access to stickers, that are in the chat, and then access to our Beaver Dam Discord as well. And then don't forget, if you ever miss a live, YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so Beaver Politics on YouTube.
All right. Thank you, Nerdy. The conversation about, we're not sort of focused in the right areas because of the culture war and some things like that. What do you think about the follow the money place in terms of how we can hold people accountable? Because I call him Tiny Trump, but going out there and abusing the privilege of Canadian tax dollars and lying to people, and knowing now that his main funder is oil and gas. And who is the one that's going to benefit from the lack of a carbon tax? and that this whole carbon tax, like just that one slogan, is funded and funneled that way. How can we do you have any ideas about how we could make a step towards getting that acknowledged and shifted somehow?
I've been like for years now dealing with people who don't like the carbon tax and scapegoat the carbon tax, and there is no talking to them. And I'll just use an example. Like the carbon tax went up in April 1st, went up by $15. Inflation peaked at Q2 2022, and it has been going down since. And since the carbon tax went up in price, inflation has gone down and stayed within the Bank of Canada's target 2 to 3% rate. So, not to mention that there are jurisdictions around the world that have all been facing inflation. It's a global thing, and not all the countries in the world have a carbon tax. So, why are we blaming the carbon tax? It's just a way to get votes. It's not a real problem, and I don't wish this on us, but we're not going to find out until he axes the tax and the rebates that come with it, and nothing gets better. There are other factors involved in inflation, obviously, because if the carbon tax is going up and inflation is going down, there's other things to consider, and we need to consider them if we actually want to fix this problem.
Okay. Who would like to go next with a question?
Can
Miss
I,
Pratt?
can I do?
Please do.
Hi, it's Frances, Women Against Polio. And so nice to see you here because you're one of my favorite.
Love your account, yes.
Yeah, TikTok people. And I'm sorry, I'm not on camera because I'm just eating some dinner and I got to head out. But I just wanted to say two things. One is you said at the beginning of your talk tonight that you're just a teacher. And my closest relative is a teacher, and that is so wrong. You're not just a teacher. You've got huge, you know this, and I don't have to tell you this, but I see it with my relative, the influence that she has on her kids. She teaches a lot of social justice types of courses to teenagers, and the stuff she tells me is amazing. It's my sister, so there is no such thing as just a teacher. So just have to say that. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is I am not a person who really had much interest in the environment in my life, just because I always kind of figured it would last for me. I've always been really politically engaged, all the rest of it. The environment kind of just wasn't my area of interest until the last couple of years. And I just want to say, please keep doing what you're doing here. Your videos are awesome. I've learned a lot. I share them with people. They're just really, really good information that people need. And in looking at what's just happened, in the United States and what Trump is saying his first days plans are going to be for, drill, baby, drill kind of thing, and getting rid of environmental regulations, all of it that's going to happen. It's really important what you're doing, I feel. And so please keep doing it. It's really critical and it's great information. It's stuff I would never have known about. I wouldn't have researched it just because I'm involved in so many other things. So thank you very, very much. And I look forward to seeing your posts as time goes on. Thank you.
This is so gratifying in the best way. I love that anything is having any sort of impact, because these are things like the conversations that we're having. That's the most important thing. And you're lovely, thank you. And your account makes me feel just a feel good account for me, because that's all you have.
Oh,
your
yeah,
post is pretty great.
Yeah. For all the reasons you said, and you were very kind about him as far as I'm concerned. But anyhow, so I'm going to just sign off here and just be a fly on the wall because I have to get going. But thank you so much for what you do and the information you provide.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good evening. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks, ladies.
So, hey, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Hi.
How are ya? You haven't been in my FYP for a while. But
Forever.
Huh?
You're a legend to me.
Oh, you're so kind. So how do we tap into the sportsmen who rely on the land, who believe in conservation, but somehow we've lost them in the fight for climate change? Because remember, climate change originally was a conservative thing. Like the conservatives all got on board. And I remember, a sportsman telling me, like, I'm not a climate change denier. I'm not against climate action. I rely on the land to hunt and fish and, camp and all of those things. So how, are we missing a way to kind of tap into those people? Because traditionally they are conservative voters, but they do care about the land. And this is the thing that I find so, I don't know, just so incongruent, is that farmers are against climate action. I don't understand how we can flip this around to make them understand.
Yeah, that's something I live this. I'm actually surrounded by hunters. It's deer season right now. I'm also
Yeah,
surrounded by farmers fields, and I do not. It does feel like when I put my Green Party sign on my end of my driveway, it did feel like a hostile environment for that. People
yeah,
are very against. You know, it's interesting because the farms around me all have it. They're required to have an environmental farm plan. They do.
yeah,
Um, but how do your question about how do you tap into that? It's like it is a conservative thing. Like if you think about how is a hunter going to vote, are
yeah,
they are they going to vote? So I think everybody is for the environment until you get oil into the mix, and then
right.
that's that's when well we have to have I need to put diesel in my pickup truck to go hunting, and it's good for the economy and all that. And I've just known this my entire life because I've been passionate about climate change since I was a teenager because I'm a nerd. And
Hmm.
ever since then, it's always been, every time this comes up as an election issue, the economy just steps in and says, no, this is not the time. And it happens every single time. And we don't realize that oil is the economy is causing the climate crisis, and capitalism and the environment are completely interlinked, especially in Canada. We're a resource rich nation. We oil, trees,
Yeah.
farming. That's like most of our economy is based on resources
Hmm.
and agriculture. And for us to not realize the effect this is going to have,
Yeah.
like
Well,
everybody who's against the carbon tax always wants to talk about the effect it's going to have on GDP. And even the PBO report that said it was going to cost $25 billion to GDP, a loss to GDP by 2030,
yeah.
did not take into account that we will lose $25 billion due to climate damages within the next 2 years at
Well,
least.
I'm sure you know, in BC here, we've actually collapsed BC fruit and BC trees, right? BC fruit and trees. They're the distribution for the orchards. And last December, we had that spike, that really warm spike, and then that deep plunge. Well, the trees all thought it was spring. And so they all budded and they started the process. And then we were hit with the deep freeze,
Oh no.
and everybody lost their crops. There was no grapes. There was barely any stone fruit. There's barely any apples. Like all of our stone fruit and our cherries came from Washington State this year. And those growers, uh, they didn't make market because they didn't have anything to take to market. And then the distribution, because their farmers were having such a hard time, and the crop tanked, the co-op tanked, the distribution center tanked. And so now farmers have no way to get anything to market because the distribution center collapsed, because of the deep freeze, because of climate change. And yet the everything above Hope in British Columbia went blue.
So what is the response from these growers? Like, are they obviously not all of a sudden becoming climate activists? They're
No.
just saying, oh, this is a bad year.
A lot of people, when I have that argument with them in the comment sections and stuff, they're like, "Oh, we've had that problem before. It's just a bad year or whatever." And then you say, "Okay, great, but what about all the forest fires that have happened as well, and the flooding at the atmospheric rivers?" And because BC has been hammered, like
Yeah.
and it has increased our budget significantly. Like we're starting to have to, it's going to cost us billions to just to react to climate change. Like we just had the atmospheric river in the lower mainland here. millions of dollars of damage, billions of dollars worth of damage, and insurance companies are going to stop insuring people, right? And
I
so, you know, and I
I don't know
have
what it's
these,
going to take,
I
honestly.
just
Like
don't
if
know. I
pain is
just
right in
don't
your
understand.
wallet, and yeah, when it actually starts affecting, like the insurance companies know what's up because it hits their bottom line. And if there have been some movement on insurance companies to be like, hey, everybody needs to start doing this, or we're going to go out of business. Um, I don't know what it's gonna take to make people listen because they it seems like the harder you get hit with things like, I mean, these are new words to me just in the last 3 years: heat dome, atmospheric river.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the list keeps going on of these new weather terms. And it's November here, and as we have balmy weather in Ontario,
Yeah.
like BC like weather. And it
Yeah.
seems like the more we get hit with this reality, and even get hit with the economic losses to
Yeah.
this reality, like it really affects people's livelihoods. And we know climate change is affecting food prices more than the carbon tax is. People just double down on their denial,
Yeah.
and they'll take whatever misinformation is peddled out, whatever they'll lap it up because they don't want to confront the uncomfortable reality. That's my sense of it. If I'm getting
Well,
psychological about it,
there's a
it's really
great
frustrating.
cartoon where there's this guy at a podium, and there's all these people standing in front of him, and it says, "Who's ready for change?" And they all put up their hands. And the next caption is, "Now who wants to change?" And nobody puts up their hand.
Yeah, change is hard. It's uncomfortable.
I mean, on
It
election
is.
day, there literally was one of those atmospheric
Yeah.
rivers tearing apart a riding that voted with
Conservative. Yeah.
I think Polly Chick has been waiting to speak for a few minutes now.
All right. I don't know how to acknowledge Polly Chick, but you're welcome to
Been
come up and say
asking.
anything. Thank you for joining.
I'm here.
Hi.
Just let us know when you want to talk.
So I wanted to ask Simcoe, sorry,
Yeah. Hi.
how you felt about people. People are really upset about what went on in the States right now, and with that Trump got elected, and so now they're even people in Canada are saying that our democracy is under attack. That a lot of the left wing creators and like the USA ones, like David Pacman and them are saying that they're losing followers like crazy, and they feel like that the left is starting to give up on democracy. I'm just wondering how do you feel about that? Do you think that we're giving up?
Well, I'm gonna just through my own lens, because I'm gonna say I really stayed blissfully unaware of the U.S. election. But here's what I think it means for Canada, and I'm not gonna get into like what is happening in the States. So that's that's the most important question. And we have a political system in Canada, like the third parties were trying to break through, right? There's like this was the moment, if it was ever going to happen, where you had two candidates, and you have Palestine, you have Gaza, you have a genocide going on. That's the thing that's really ignited the left right now in a way that's nothing else has recently. And you had two candidates who were both pro-Israel, because that is the kind of Western hegemonic principle that's behind everything, regardless. And then you had other third parties coming in, like the Green Party in the States through Jill Stein, and even a Communist Party making a surgence. And they were this is to me is democracy, when you have more parties like we do in Canada. Like we do in Canada. Like we have the two major parties, just like the Democrats and Republicans. We have got red and blue, but we also have the NDP.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God for the NDP, and thank God for the Greens, because they're adding to this discourse. Like Elizabeth May, however you feel about her, played a really important role in this foreign interference scandal. She got her security clearance, she checked it out, and she was able to be a voice in that discussion who is proximity to power. She has a large voice, but she's not like Jagmeet Singh, who maybe wants to be prime minister. She knows she's never going to be prime minister. She knows she's not going to get any more seats necessarily. So she doesn't really have to speak in a way that's like, I'm so close, I need to attack my opponents and try to win this. She's just being a genuine person who cares about her country and cares about democracy. And for her to have that platform, I'm grateful for. And that's why I don't like these two-party systems and this kind of like Super Bowl mentality we get into with with elections where it's like, who's going to win this thing? And yeah, I think we need to change our electoral system to allow for more parties and more diverse voices and more cooperation, because we have now Donald Trump in the States, who has he has control of the Senate and the executive, obviously, but I think if
The
I'm not
House is up
mistaken,
for grabs still. The House is still it's undetermined.
yeah, but maybe he's going to go Democrat, so he doesn't have total power. So he's going to have a little bit of accountability, and thankfully, you need a check on this power.
Yeah.
I always think about when Barack Obama handed it over to Trump, like what a transition that was, right? What a moment.
Yeah.
And Barack seemed pretty cool about it, because when it came right down to it, he was a constitutionalist. He believed in the democratic institutions, and he knew that they would persist and keep him in check to a degree, besides his executive power. So these are the things that I think are the most important for us to embrace, even if you live in a safe riding like I do for a one party. If it's a safe riding, vote how you want. If you are really want to, you're really green, but you want to vote liberal because you think it's going to beat the conservative, it's not a horse race. And if it was a horse race, you wouldn't bet on a horse that you knew was going to lose, right? So if you really, really want, bet on the horse that you like, because it's not a horse race, it's democracy, it's a conversation. And it does send a message to, the person in your safe riding, hey, don't take this riding for granted. And then they start, maybe paying a little more attention, and maybe, knowing
Well,
things matter.
I think
truthfully, it really matters.
sorry, I think you're going to find that Scott Moe in Saskatchewan is going to be much better behaved in these next 4 years because of how many seats they lost.
Historic win for him. Like, they're the longest serving party
Yeah.
since the CCF, right?
Yeah.
But still not a resounding victory. Yeah, then that's
No.
good. That's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nerdy, I see your hand up. Did you want to say something? Or Mrs. Radical wants to say something? You're pointing.
Thanks, I appreciate that, Nerdy. Yeah, I kind of wanted to go into that conversation about what do you think Canadians need to focus on more, and just why, and to point out, why it's so important to have so many parties when we look at what happened in the BC election, right? Just bringing in those Greens, and now we have those Green seats, and how important those Green seats hold.
That is pretty wild. I've been thinking about that too. Like, it's going to be strange for me to say this, but I feel like the Greens have too much power here.
Oh, really?
Well, they're kingmakers, right? I mean, I don't like using that expression, but it's like
They are.
everybody has to go to the Greens. I think it's good for democracy because it involves, a little bit of cooperation and some compromise, which is, to me, in a diverse democracy, a good thing. But it's wild to me that if we had a different electoral system, it might look a lot more different, and the I guess level of cooperation would be more broad, and I think that's a good thing. Yeah.
I do believe
the distorted results we get from elections are problematic.
I do believe our system
Sorry, go
has
ahead.
layers of bureaucracy in it. And I'm now at this stage starting to appreciate the layers of bureaucracy, because the person who wants to kind of do the fascist piece, rule, authoritarian, they got a lot to do to dismantle. An example of that is people not understanding the arm's length of BC elections, or Elections Canada, or how they are separate nonpartisan entities. And to be able to go in and dismantle those entities, it's not that easy, because they hold their commitment is not to a party. And because we have so many layers of that. So when, for instance, in British Columbia, our government just increased public sector jobs by 12%. And all the capitalists are upset about that. But to me, that's more boots on the ground, more people when you go to get your driver's license, more people when you need your hunting license, and all of that. And we're upset when our government hires people, but we're not upset when our government gives money to corporations to hire people. And so to me, it's kind of like that our tax dollar goes directly into our bureaucracy, and I appreciate those pieces now. I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. Is it Emma Strong that's up here?
I think it's
I see.
Smashy.
Oh, Smash. Sorry, I don't have my glasses.
Sorry.
Smash, do you want to have something to say?
Yeah, so going back to like the economy and the loss of the because of the forest fires and the freezing and stuff like that, do you guys realize that when we take things from the earth or the ground, we're actually supposed to be putting stuff into the ground because then it repeats and it replenishes and it does all this because if we're taking more out of the ground and not putting anything, what is going to really be there at the end of the day? There's nothing going to be there. And I firmly believe that we need to start doing that because if we're going to take something out, we need to put something back in. But that's just my opinion, right? I mean, it's call it what it is, say what it's an economic growth. It could be economically sound for us to keep replenishing what we take out. So, say we take out the trees because of lumber, we plant 5 more trees. I know it takes a long time for a tree to grow, but you're giving something back to the earth to continue that cycle. And say you take out you dig a hole for drilling, which I really don't agree with, but that's just me. Um, you drill for minerals and nutrients, you got to give something back to the earth, like plant something in that respect, because then it brings more. Like it's a cycle, right? It's a whole. What is the word? It's a cycle of. It's a repetition cycle, right? So you just have all this stuff going back into the earth as we're taking it out, and that's what I only have to say on that one. So.
That's a pretty great opinion. I think it's more than an opinion. It's just like an undeniable, immutable truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I happen to own a gold claim. My husband and I have a gold claim, and we have to fill the holes. It is part, and we have to take pictures, and we have to submit that as part of the documentation. I know it's a little example because we only dig
That's
little
wild.
holes, but we care about no, I'm searching for the word too. But we have to put it back together, and on people come and poach on our claim, and
Replenish.
they dig big, like 3-foot holes, and they leave us. You know,
I'm sure, though, you probably are very mindful, the missus and your husband, that you put dirt back in those holes and natural resources back in those holes. You don't fill those holes with barite and tires.
they're what?
It's called barite and it's called tires. And it's a toxic sludge that they mess up. And when they're fracking and they go hundreds of miles down into the earth and they're pulling out those, they fill it with ripped up shredded tires and chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that
Oh
because my husband was a
no.
well site geologist in Alberta working in the oil and gas industry.
I've even read that there's actually problems with the saplings and the way that we are replanting the trees, that it's actually robbing the ground of nutrients because it's it's not a natural occurrence. And so young trees compared to old growth does not do the same thing for the soil or the forest floor or the environment. So it's not a proper equivalency, and that's why it's so important to protect the old growth because it stabilizes the forest, it stabilizes the soil, stabilizes the environment. But when you log them and you plant too many new saplings or new trees, they don't perform the same way and they don't have the same function in the forest.
Yeah. Clear cutting just decimates an ecosystem, and it will take centuries to recover. But
Yeah.
there are sustainable ways to log, if you want, that involve selective logging that maintain the forest ecosystem. That is far more valuable in the long run than clear cutting. Yeah.
But people don't want to pay that.
Absolutely.
That's the thing about the resource. The resource sector is behind all of our conservative politicians in the country right now. The resource sector is funding the. Ooh, what was that?
Sound coming through, like,
I don't think it's
That
me.
was we hit the gift goal.
Oh, okay. What was I saying was uh, all the resource industry, like logging, the oil and gas, all of it. They're the ones funding our conservatives now. They're the ones that are behind there's a lobby group that are behind the messaging that is behind the conservative politicians. And John Rustad, when he finally released his costed platform, he tried to say that he was going to increase our GDP by 5.4% because he was going to extract whatever he could out of the province and take it to market. But people don't understand the cost of that, right? They don't understand the back end costs of that. Sure, that's great, a 4.5 GDP increase for now, but what happens when you've decimated the forest? It's not functioning the way it's supposed to. And now we have landslides, and we have forests dying, and we have wildfires that are taking out towns, and you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense.
I
No,
don't
there's
live in Alberta, but we've had a guest on here, Treaty 6 Birder.
Mm-hmm.
Is an Indigenous woman and has experience working with protecting economic rights with Indigenous development and resources and stuff like that. She said something that just stuck with me, and that is that you will never, ever be lost in Alberta, ever. That there are so many oil rigs and roads put down to get to them that if you went in any direction she had a specific number, it was 2.5 kilometers, you will be saved. But think about the massive onslaught on the environment what it took to get there. What it took to get there just blows my mind.
Yeah, I was going to say there are obvious ecosystem services that are provided. I mean, we need nature to live. It's basically, the food that we eat and the air that we breathe and the water we drink all comes from the land, and we're fundamentally disconnected. But besides that, there's also people talk about, conservatives especially like to talk about the debt that our children and grandchildren will be paying off in terms of government debt. But they don't talk about the ecological debt, and they don't talk about the economic losses that are externalized from certain resource extraction or economic activities. So, oil and gas, the subsidies to oil and gas are not just tax breaks and grants, they're also the social and environmental costs that all taxpayers pay, and the oil and gas companies do not. And until you internalize those costs, and this is why one of the reasons I favor some sort of carbon tax is because the oil and gas companies are not using their profits to pay for orphaned well cleanups, for example, not sufficiently anyway. That falls on us. So we're subsidizing their profits. And when people say, "Oh, I don't want to give my tax money to people, but they're okay to give it to businesses," you're just paying taxes of a different kind, and those are called profits. So anyway, the economic thing is so intertwined with the environment because the two main sources that we get excess value from, or profits, in this world, in our economy, our capitalist economy, are labor and nature. So working people, productive working people, create value. We extract value from the land, and that has to be done sustainably on both ends. People have to be paid well.
And capitalism is a system that demands infinite growth in a finite system. So
Not compatible.
It's not compatible. And what goes out the window every time a conservative gets into power, they want to get at the resources as fast and as cheaply as possible. So what goes? Environmental protections, right? That's the first thing that goes every time. And then what's the cost of that on the back end? Right? Because not only are you taking away the protection, but you're ramping up the resource extraction, and you're doing it as cheaply and as fast as possible, which isn't necessarily compatible with protecting the environment. Because that's what they complain about, right?
When you
They complain.
deregulate,
Sorry, go ahead.
you just unleash that beast, and it
Yeah.
becomes all about extracting as much profit as is possible, and that is not compatible with any type of sustainable
No,
way of living at all.
no, no.
So, do you, as a Green Party member in Ontario, do you have access to Elizabeth May, so to speak? And
Oh yeah, we chat regularly. No, I
yeah.
I've not ever met Elizabeth May. She's liked some of my social media posts, but I've never met her or spoken to her though. I have met the Green Leader Party. I was just actually talking to Mike Schreiner a couple weeks ago. So yeah, I do meet him, and the other Green MPP we have Ashlyn Clancy. She's lovely, and they do incredible work with their communities, and it's the communities green on both levels, federally and provincially, in Kitchener Center, and they work together on issues at both levels of government, and try to draft off each other, and they're really effective in that way. Like Greens punch way above their weight when they're actually elected, and yeah, the provincial Greens here are a real big success story. Even though there's only two of them, just like there's only two federal MPs, they really do make a lot of difference to their communities. Why do you ask?
Well, I'm a little curious. Well, because the federal Green Party went through a bit of a shuffle there, right? And so, do you have any comments about what happened there? Did you think that destabilized the party, or do you think that helped to? Because Elizabeth May brought it back together again, right? And so it seems.
Yeah, I ran in when it was probably like the worst time to run as a Green, and I was proud. Like I did it to stabilize, to do a small part to stabilize the party. I managed to get a few thousand votes, and almost 3% of the vote. I still lost to the Libertarian candidate, which was a big. But I understand the circumstances around that. But the party has been basically in free fall since then, and we've kind of like stabilized it a bit. And I feel like it's energizing now, in as the election comes up. But there's still a lot of internal turmoil that I'm not privy to. I wish I had more insight for you. I'd love to have some tea to spill, some green tea to spill, but I really don't. All I can tell you is that Jonathan Pedno, the co-leader, left the federal party because there was this question around the party's constitution about co-leadership. That's not a thing yet, and he was around for a year or more, a couple of years, and waiting for this constitutional change to happen so that they could have a co-leadership model like other Greens in the world, and it just never happened. And my feeling is he just got fed up and he left. I do feel like Elizabeth May wants to step down, but she wants to have a good succession, and I think she wants to handpick the person who succeeds her, and I just don't see that happening yet. Yeah,
That's interesting. Thank
you should
you.
almost she's told Trudeau to step down, like he should step down, but she's probably facing a lot of that question herself, I'm sure. Yeah.
Happy had a question.
And Happy join us.
Hey, Happy.
Hi,
Hey, how
Abby.
are you? Thanks for having me up. Thanks for
Hi.
the live. It's been quite interesting. As a former supporter of the Green Party, I do continue to support their message, and I've voted for Miss May multiple times. I find her great. She's amazing. My question is in regards to the current climate within federal politics, the populism kind of movement that has taken over, and what we've seen with, the elections in the United States. Do you think there is pressure right now on Canadian federal politicians on the left side to have an official coalition materialize somehow within all the leftist parties, like including Green Party, NDP, and the Liberals, who I vote for now? I'm a big Justin Trudeau supporter, but in kind of like to fight off how the Conservatives did it. So, long story short, you get the gist of the question. Do you think that would be
Yeah.
a wise choice or anything?
My answer to that is going to be, I mean, they've been saying the word coalition government on the right for, as long as the NDP supply and confidence agreement's been going on, and it's not a coalition government, like, right? Um, I have no appetite for coalition governments because that brings me back to the politics is about winning, not about a conversation piece. I want electoral reform. I want electoral reform so that we have non-distorted results to our elections and we end up with governments that need to speak to each other and compromise and come to consensus rather than giving power to one party and having them do what they will and then just having that be undone by the next party that comes in and forms a majority. And I think people feel how they feel about the NDP Liberal, and I think it's been used as a cudgel by the right to say, this Liberal NDP government, but they've done a lot of really good things as a result of compromise, and that's undeniable. And we need more of it. And I think the way to do that is a National Citizens Assembly on electoral reform, where you take that decision out of the hands of politicians, you put it in the hands of voters, and let them decide on the system that proportional representation is used in some of the most highly rated democracies around the world, including those Nordic countries social democracies we all really look up to for their standard of living. They do not have first past the post. And any kind of fear mongering, especially that comes from, I really believe that's the answer. I'm just.
So I do a second part to the question, if I may, and then I'll bounce. But when you mention something like electoral reform, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with who Nate Erskine Smith is.
Yep.
So he has a podcast, and he had the prime minister on the podcast, and during that podcast he asked him certain questions. One of the questions was, what do you see as one of your biggest regrets? And he admittedly he said that electoral reform was one of his bigger regrets because he didn't push through a ranked ballot system, because he opened up the debate on which policy to adopt going forward. He couldn't implement his own preference of those, and here we are, still with the same system before. Do you think if he would have pushed forward with the ranked ballot system, that would have been satisfactory as far as electoral reform? Or do you think, like you mentioned, proportionate representation as an alternative, and with is there a divide on where to go if there is electoral reform? What kind of consensus do you think we could come to around that? Anyways, thank you very much for the questions.
Great.
That's a great question, and I'm just grinning because I actually made a video in response to that interview and that portion of that interview, and I would just immediately just say, if you wanted ranked ballot, then why didn't you push for ranked ballot? And if you wanted ranked ballot, why didn't you campaign on ranked ballot? He never said, I am campaigning on ranked ballot. He said, I'm campaigning on electoral reform, and something that does not distort results. Yeah, and if you look at the only example that's comparable to Canada around the world of a ranked ballot voting system or electoral system at the federal level is Australia. And if you look at Australia, they have distorted results, extreme polarization. It does not solve any of the issues. So to me, that's a typical, and I know we have liberal supporters here, but it's a typical liberal solution that is not, it's offering change that doesn't actually change anything. So that's how I feel about that. I was a little upset by that portion of that interview.
Interesting, because I've heard other poli-sci people say that ranked choice and proportional are similar, but they're not interchangeable. They're not interchangeable.
Yeah, there are forms of ranked balance that are proportional. Yes, but
Okay.
the kind that Justin Trudeau is talking about is not that type of voting system, electoral system.
Well, I think we've got to do
You
something.
can't have proportional representation without doing some of the things that he's against, like having multiple members and party members kind of as fill-ins to sort of fill in the gaps that from the distorted results of the elections. Yeah.
Well,
I just
think-
want to
Sorry.
super somebody's been up in our box as well, and I wanted to see if they wanted to make a comment. Not to
Yeah.
yourself.
Yes, I would. Are you talking to me?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, okay. As long as we're talking environmental, I thought I'd bring up something that's been bothering me for almost 50 years. I lived in California in the 70s, the early 70s, and my son worked there for 12 years. And they had serious water issues. And I thought 30 years ago, I predicted that one day the Americans were going to turn an envious glance towards Canada for our water. And guess what? Trump wants our water.
Mhm.
So there's another. Forget the oil. It's the water, guys. And if you've ever flown over Canada, and I was a military wife for 32 years, so I've traveled a tremendous amount, but you know that there are thousands of lakes. We have water. We have 20% of the world's fresh water.
Mhm.
So what do you think of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I think it's very
Fresh water is a finite resource, and you know, yeah, how that goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know in
Yeah.
British Columbia we were upset when our conservative government, wearing the cloak of liberals back under Christy Clark and Gordon Campbell, they sold off our water to Nestle.
Yeah. For
Well,
a
you
dollar.
$1 for like literally $1 or $2. They get like 1,000,000 gallons of water.
Yeah.
Like
That's
Yeah.
That's another thing that bothers me a lot. We give away our resources. We don't seem to have the stomach to charge for our resources, you know? We are powering the eastern seaboard of the United States, you know? Are we giving it all away?
I think we have character actor syndrome. We think that while we're trying to present on the world stage as a big boy or a big girl, right? Like the big, like we're all grown up and we're playing with the adults, we still think of ourselves as at the kiddie table. And
I think
so
you're right.
we think that we have to offer everything up in order for people to come play with us.
I think
But
that's true.
really, we hold what nobody else has.
That's exactly right. We're the richest resource country. Well, I mean, Africa is pretty rich too,
Yeah.
but as a continent, we're right up there, you know.
Yeah.
I always said about the free trade
Yeah,
agreement
and
with
this
Mexico that, we're the resources, Mexico's the slave labor, and the consumers are in the United States.
Yeah.
That's the big formula there.
Yeah.
and I hear a little bit in your comment there, Super Granny, that this conversation we all have about whenever it comes to like taxing wealth or like closing some of the loopholes that are available for ultra wealthy people but not working people, that this conversation, well, all the capital is going to leave Canada. They're going to pack up their money and they're going to take it with them to places where they get better deals than us. And it's like the resources are here. You cannot move those resources anywhere else. The tax deals, sure, you can change up, but I think you're right that we undervalue Canadian resources, and really we should value ourselves more, and we should value ourselves by taxing the way they do in Norway. Norway has a sovereign wealth fund from their oil wealth, which I'm not saying that I'm pro oil, but if you are going to, you're going to take the economic benefits from that oil and you're going to help people with it. Even Alaska has a sovereign wealth fund from their oil that they pay a dividend to all Alaskans and have for decades. And meanwhile, in Canada, the royalties from the oil and gas amount to something like tens of dollars per Canadian per capita per year.
Yeah.
It's abysmal. They make it seem like it's a great deal for Canada, but it really is not as good as they think it is. Yeah.
I would like to see Canada get tough. Like I remember Diefenbaker. I was quite young, but I remember him very clearly.
Oh, wow.
And he's the only prime minister who stood up to the Americans.
Yeah.
And he banned all the nuclear weapons from Canada. And the Americans were pretty upset, but they got over it. We seem to be intimidated by the States, and I would like to see us get a little tougher.
Well, I think too we're a little bit of we're a little apologetic to the States. Like I remember as a kid, like if you wanted to do anything with your life, you had to move to the US. And we've come a long way since then. I'm 56 now. and you know, if you wanted to be an actor, you had to go to the US. If you wanted to be an artist, you had to go to the US. If you wanted to be in technology, you had to go to the US. If you wanted to be a serious banker, you had to go to the US, right? Like it was always about driving people to the US. And I think along the way, Canada grew up, but we still think of it, you know, as it was 70 years, you know, in the 1970s, where we don't seem to understand that we have the power here for, like, we have those opportunities here in our country.
Yeah.
We don't need to go to Big Brother to
Yeah.
to satisfy them, right?
We've always been in awe of the Americans
Yeah.
and intimidated by them. I remember the old joke, you know, living next to the United States is like a mouse sleeping next to an elephant. It's nice and warm and cozy there, but what if the elephant rolls over?
Yeah.
And we are intimidated by them. And I think we have to get over that. I mean,
Well, and I think we piggybacked off their culture, and that didn't help either,
Yeah.
right? Like, you know, if you got, when you finally got cable, it was American TV shows. I know, you know, where I was when we finally got, you know, 20 channels or 26 channels or whatever, they came from the US. They didn't come from Canada. And
Yeah.
so we've been fed a steady diet of USA for, you know, forever. And I
Yeah.
think that hasn't helped us either.
No, it hasn't. I was 13 when we got our first television set, so that's when I began to watch Davy Crockett and all that. So we did have a much more Canadian identity in those days, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm seeing in the comments here too, like that there's someone saying that we can't get our resources to world markets and we undervalue our resources. And I have to point out that changed recently with you, me, and everybody in this chat and everyone in these comments each paid $850 towards the Trans Mountain expansion, that pipeline that is effectively taking our oil to world markets. So we're talking about how the United States, where, you know, they're the elephant. They have been the only market for Canadian oil for forever, you know, and they're our biggest market for everything. But we had no choices, and this pipeline that we all paid for is now getting that oil to markets in Asia, across the Pacific Ocean. It's tidewater in BC, right? And the first quarter results came out. I think the second quarter I haven't looked, but first quarter results showed no economic benefit to that for Canadians.
Yeah.
So it does give a slightly better deal for oil producers per barrel. I think they save $10, $15 over transporting by rail. I don't think Canadians will see our return on our $850 investment in our lifetime, unless they start charging higher royalties for using that pipeline. And the economic benefit isn't even really there, not yet anyway.
No.
So it really is a sorry state of affairs. I really want to know who is benefiting from this pipeline and the climate damaging pollution that it's going to lead to. You know, because in Canada we have domestic emissions, but whatever our domestic emissions are, we export more within our own borders, and Trans Mountain expansion is going to only increase that.
And I
Without
heard
paying us.
from some very good close oil and gas friends in Alberta that it's come down the pipeline since yesterday that a lot of people will be losing their jobs as of the Trump election. So that's really interesting, right?
Wait till they tariff Canadian oil.
That's why they're losing their jobs. All of those, you know, those were the first people really in Canada, in my mind, to become indoctrinated. My husband worked in those fields. He heard those conversations. And those people pushed really hard for Trump to get in. And again, that conversation had to happen and be explained to them now what a tariff is and how they are deeply affected.
Yeah.
Horrible.
The oil sands, they're keeping the oil sands very, very quiet and under wraps. It's doing tremendous damage up north. We were in Alberta 7 years with military 3 different times, and Cold Lake was one of the biggest lakes in Canada. You know, like
Mhm.
Lake Winnipeg. It's 30 miles long, 3 miles wide. It's bottomless. It's dropped several feet because of the oil sands. The water
Mhm.
levels dropped.
And they lie about their testing too,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, didn't that bombshell report come out last year where they underreported by like a thousand percent,
6,000,
six
6,000%.
thousand percent? Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
the indigenous were reporting, like, because there were indigenous reserves that are living off the river and the land in those areas, and they were reporting some pretty spectacular things about the fish they were seeing and how they were changing because of the toxins in the water and how they
And
were
this,
affected.
and that's exactly why Rustad wanted to repeal DRIPA in
Mhm.
BC, right? He wants to take that the indigenous stewardship and indigenous seat at the table. He want for these projects going through our forests and our lands and stuff, all the unceded territory. That's why he wanted to repeal DRIPA, because he doesn't like that they have that say. He doesn't like having to go through those channels, because he knows that what he's trying to do is not compatible with their land, right? With the land. And he really does not want those indigenous rights cemented and those relationships repaired. He wants economic reconciliation, which is throw a bunch of money at them and then, and then kill their land, right?
And who in that situation is not going to look at that proposition and say, hey, whatever they're willing to pay me, I'm worth way more than that.
Yeah,
So if economic reconciliation it is, I want that seat at the table. That's I don't
yeah,
know anyone with a in their right mind who wouldn't be like, whatever you're paying me, I know I'm worth way more than that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Because you're out here to make a profit, and there's no way this deal that you're offering me doesn't benefit you. So yeah, I don't blame indigenous people, whether it's for their land, whether it's fighting for the land or fighting for their just own dignity.
yeah,
Why you would give that up
yeah,
to any government?
yeah,
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Co Gray, I have a question about Sarnia, Ontario, because we were just talking about the big pollutant Trans Mountain Pipeline stuff for BC. But I learned about Sarnia, Ontario quite a few years ago because I had a disease called endometriosis. And Sarnia, Ontario is the chemical capital of Canada, correct? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they polluted the river. And I read about a study of an indigenous group of people that lived down the river and they were birthing 9 female children to every 1 male because of the estrogen that the chemicals emit from what's being polluted into the river. And people, indigenous group, but it's the St. Lawrence River, right? Like, it is like the amount of pollution's just, how does that get managed in Ontario? How is that conversation, like from a green perspective? It must be the nightmare of the province, right?
Yeah, and there's also Grassy Narrows, which is an indigenous community that was polluted with mercury from a paper mill that they just thousands of tons of mercury, and they just let it. I don't know if that number is correct, but it is polluted the water there, and it's mercury doesn't go anywhere. It stayed there. It's in the sediment for generations, and it's had incredible effects on health in that community. Um, I'm proud to say that Elizabeth May, and I think it's passed, it's in the final stages, an environmental racism bill, because that's what we're talking about here.
Yes.
These polluting projects are more likely to exist in communities where people cannot fight back, where they're undervalued economically, so they know they don't pose as much of a, there can't be as much pushback as if it was next to a golf course in a gated community, right? There's no way those people are going to allow Chemical Valley next to their property. But if you go into a neighborhood that's impoverished or an indigenous community, there's definitely a value proposition there for anybody setting up any kind of polluting industry, because we know that these industries are profitable because they externalize the cost of their pollution, the social costs. And you're less likely to pay out the social costs when you're dealing with a marginalized community or racialized community. So this bill that is being put forward by Elizabeth May, and I do believe it's in the final stages. If not passed, I'm sorry, I don't know that. This will create a framework to address that issue and make it so that's far less likely to happen in the future.
Well, good to have a safety net of some sort, right? You got to start somewhere. The amount of vast conversations to overcome the problems within the climate denialism, as you had written, that whole phenomenon, I sort of am starting to, as we have our conversation here tonight, kind of liken it to how people voted against their own best interests, right? And they get overwhelmed with the trauma of the problem, and they become very self-protective. And so they only, they definitely see through the lens of their immediate, let's just say their immediate family members or their immediate, how we survive. Very, it's an interesting phenomenon to have a look at, right? Because it's an overwhelming topic. It's just overwhelming.
Here's an interesting into that phenomenon. So, because we're looking at another Trump presidency, do you remember how many speakers Trump went through?
Yes.
Right? Like what was the first one? Was like Sean something, and then it's just a parade of speakers. So one of the first things that Donald Trump does with his speaker is he makes them go out and lie on camera. So the first lie was about the crowd sizes at his inauguration, right? So the reason that he does this is because someone like him, who's like a mafia boss really in his mentality, values loyalty more than anything else. And when you go out and you repeat a lie to the entire country and the entire world, well, now you're with me. We're both liars. We're in this lie together, and you're loyal to me. Because whatever happens to me, you're going with me now, right?
Yeah.
This is what we've all allowed to happen to ourselves, because we live in a system that is not serving us, but it's all we know. We didn't choose it. We just were born into it. And some of us have convinced ourselves, most of us have convinced ourselves that, first of all, because change is so uncomfortable, we've just accepted it. And now that we've accepted it, we will not allow ourselves to admit to ourselves that we've been taken advantage of. We would rather commit to the lie and double down on the lie than actually commit to changing it, because that's just more comfortable, I guess. I don't know what else to say. The consequences to changing are there's so much promise there, but that's not enough to break us out of this I guess trap we've set for ourselves or allowed ourselves to fall into. Just like that Trump speaker of Speaker of the House, not Speaker of the House, his press secretary.
Press secretary.
Secretary.
Hey, he goes to the speakers of the House pretty good too. I recall. So this has been a really fascinating conversation, and it's not often we get to do the deep dive on the environmental question. I really enjoyed the conversation about the environmental racism, right? Because in British Columbia here, we are morphing our government to try and eliminate some of that. And there is huge pushback on that. Racism is a tool, of course, that you can manipulate people with, but I have to live through and witness the phenomenon of scapegoating and slogans, to witness the phenomenon of tricking people with short lies, has truly been humbling in many ways.
Earlier, Simcoe, you talked about the Freedom Convoy and talked about how they focus their anxiety. And I way back in the day, in the 70s, I read a book called Future Shock, and it's still relevant today. I don't know if any of you've heard of it, but it really addressed rapid change and what it does to us psychologically when we can't adapt. We simply can't adapt. So something happens that psychologists called in those days a free-floating anger that just floats out there and attaches itself to some object, some other. In the, in the witch burning days, it was witches. Today,
Yeah.
it's the government. It's
Mhm.
always something we don't feel we have any control over. Uh, and that's really at the root of it, the lack of control, the feeling that we're losing control. And it gives
That's
us a
scary.
high state of anxiety. And we've been through 4 years of rapid, frightening change. I mean, it's the pandemic was unbelievably scary. And then the wars, and wars and pandemic actually go together in history. The First World War was around the huge
Spanish flu.
Spanish flu.
Spanish flu pandemic, and it it's cyclical. It's 80 years or a century, and it's very disturbing. We're all in a state of anxiety, and it's hard to remain rational.
And it's like, yeah, and a wise politician knows how to capitalize on that irrational anger and fear and frustration, right? And it's not to help us.
And right now, it's the the elite. That they've built this narrative that the elite are all responsible for their problems. And in Canada, there's no elite. I mean, there are people with more education, with more success, but we are just not elitists. So it's just so irrational.
Well, I mean, it's a
Well,
couple billionaires convinced a bunch of poor
yeah.
people that poor people are the problem.
Mhm.
Really?
And if you look at the cover of Maclean's now, is the richest families in Canada, richest. It's the Westons, the Thompsons, they're all, they got the cover of the magazine, and they are, the magazine to me should say the biggest exploiters. People can't afford to eat, and they're putting the richest Canadians on the cover of the magazine. Why are they doing
I think that's
Tone
like
deaf.
really bad taste.
that? Yeah.
Like in the Depression era, the great robber barons were in control, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers. And then FDR came along with the New Deal and completely changed the direction of American politics and the world, for that matter, the Western world. And it seems like we're reverting to that pre-FDR era, and that now the oligarchs are the big families are in control now. And that's it makes you very uneasy, to feel victimized, I guess, all the time.
It's so funny. We don't see the problems that are right in front of us, and we somehow pivot and blame things, anything else
Anything
other
else.
than the real problem. Really,
Yeah.
that's
And if
frustrating.
you get everybody else who's scared together and you all have a common enemy, that gives you purpose and a drive. And there you go. You jump into your trucks and you head off to the city.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
this is where the left and the progressives are failing in Canada for sure. Where is our effective way to mobilize people to realize that, the real problem is, the government has a lot of responsibility and a lot of accountability, but really nobody seems to take a look at corporations and big business and the role that they played in how hard it's been, especially over the last 4 years, and how good they've had it. I know we'll probably have to wrap up, but income distribution in Canada it's at its wide. The wealth gap is its widest that it's ever been since they started recording in 1990. The gap between the top 40 and the bottom 40, the 20% in the middle, there's a 47% percentage point gap between those two, and the upper 20% holds 68% of the wealth in Canada, and the bottom 40% hold less than 3% of the wealth in this country.
Right.
And
So if you want to know who this economy is working for, who's benefiting, it's very, very plain to see. And for some reason, people still want to blame the carbon tax.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I living in the States, I only lived there a year, but I visited a lot. And the disparity between the rich and the poor and the upper middle class and the poor is really, really, really big. I mean, we're far more egalitarian in Canada. We really are.
I think we were. I don't think that's the case anymore, though. Unfortunately, we have a pretty good middle class, but the people who are getting wealthier and wealthier in this country are getting wealthy off of investments. So corporate profits, dividend payouts, share buybacks, whatever it is that they're doing. The people who are making the most income, the biggest form of income, and especially the less taxed form of income, is capital gains. Wages are up, but that doesn't, somehow wages are up because of, we talked about this earlier, the health and public sector employment is up, and that's actually driving GDP. It's actually, that's one of the biggest factors in GDP growth is public sector employees. The private sector is just not doing it. They're not cutting it. And the wealth,
It's a
and all the
fascinating
profits,
conversation.
wealth that's been hoarded. Yeah.
We're going to hand it over to Nerdy for a second. Sorry.
Well, Shania's been trying to talk. She's been trying to interject, but hasn't been able to. And now she's teacupped. So I wanted to let her have a chance before we ended.
Too late.
Maybe she got a phone call.
Yeah, I heard her speak a little earlier, and just was trying to interject that we're at 6:30.
She probably got a phone call.
So we should probably think about wrapping up the show. Interesting conversation, and I think a lot of points of view got highlighted here tonight, and it was an honor to be able to platform you, and an honor to bring up the guests as well. And thank you for being tolerant of anything we can't do in terms of getting your question answered right away. We're trying to be gentle with when we interrupt people, but it is a talent, I must say. So thank you, Simcoe Gray. We will love to have you back on the show again in the future. And I'll leave Miss Radical and Nerdy, Polly Chicks. Anybody want to have a last comment? No. Oh, I see it.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for
It's really been wonderful. I've enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Just a reminder to everybody who's still here. Yeah, just a reminder to everybody who's still here. If you didn't catch the full thing, it will be available on YouTube tomorrow morning.
That's great. Thank you again, Simcoe Gray.
Thank you for having me. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you.
It's a great conversation.
That's
Night night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.